Peter Gabriel is most well known for his time as the lead singer of the legendary prog rock band Genesis, but in 1975, after leaving the group, he also launched a successful solo career and spawned several hit singles like Solsbury Hill
Climbing up on Solsbury Hill, I could see
and Sledgehammer. He's also the founder of the WOMAD festival and is known for being an avid human rights activist. In 2010, he was also inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame together with his bandmates in Genesis, and for good reasons. He's an artist that always wanted to explore and create new realms of music, and ultimately made the world of rock music a whole lot more interesting. So let's take a closer look. Peter Brian Gabriel was born on the 13th of February 1950 in Cobham, Surrey in England. His father, Ralph Parton Gabriel, was an electrical engineer, while his mother, Edith Irene, who was from a musical family, taught him how to play the piano at an early age. He went to St. Andrew's Prep School, a school that parents sent their kids to in order to learn how to become a leader or an industrial figurehead in society. But Gabriel and his friends had other ideas in mind. Peter founded Genesis in 1967 with fellow Charterhouse school pupils Tony Banks, Anthony Phillips, Mike Rutherford, and drummer Chris Stewart. One of the reasons why people got their eyes up for Genesis was because of Gabriel's outstanding stage presence. This was a young man who in social settings would be quite reserved, while on stage he transformed into something vibrant and animated. He would appear in these bizarre costumes and tell stories in between songs to entertain the audience, and it certainly made an impact. Early Genesis concerts were hampered by a bad PA system that made it difficult for the audience to understand what Gabriel was singing, and according to Mike Rutherford, this drove Gabriel to find other ways to impress with his personality, leading him to try out different costumes and using role-playing during performances. He would continue to experiment with the live setting, occasionally as a solo artist too. One time, his entire band shaved their heads, and by the time of his fourth solo album, he began involving elaborate stage props and acrobatics, which had him suspended from gantries, distorting his face with Fresnel lenses and mirrors, and wearing unusual makeup. Now back to Genesis. These guys released several albums that were gonna be remembered in time as some of the finest prog rock albums of the early 70s. Foxtrot, Selling England by the Pound, and The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway all gained high chart positions in the UK after their release and has stood the test of time. But despite of their success, Peter decided to leave the group in 1975. It was something he had planned for a very long time, since he now had a sick daughter to take care of. Peter told the other members that he would eventually leave the group before they started touring their sixth studio album, and they then made his departure after the tour was finished. But this wasn't the end of his career in music. It was simply the beginning of a new one. The next year he released Solsbury Hill, which was a massive success, and then his first solo album, Car, the year after. Now I should probably also mention this, Gabriel did not title his first studio albums, causing people to refer to them by the number sequence or the artwork. For example, the first one being known as Car, the second one as Scratch, and the third one as Melt. Talking about Melt, this was probably his most ambitious album. He decided to try out a series of sonic experiments here. For example, all the session drummers for the album were asked to not use any cymbals, which made the sound of the album more tribal. This can be tracked back to Gabriel's obsession with rhythms at that time.
Gabriel's work on his new album began with a search for interesting rhythms. When we first visited him at his studio near Bath, he'd already spent many months seeking out and listening to music from all over the world. This included Aborigine, Caribbean, and Latin American music, as well as African drumming.
I don't believe that I can play music belonging to another culture. Just there will be certain key elements which I will steal to start off as a structure for something that I'm working on.
Another thing that was considered less of an experiment and more of a mistake was when he did a studio session with his former bandmate Phil Collins on drums. This quote-unquote accident is what literally caused them to invent the drum sound of the 80s. According to their audio engineer and co-producer Hugh Padgham, they had a brand new recording console with some interesting features, including a mic that hanged in the studio to talk to the band without having to leave the control room. The mic accidentally picked up the sound of Phil's drums, and with its heavy compressor, it reduced the loud sounds and amplified the quiet ones. It also had a noise gate that changed the amplitude of the sound, and the result was the sound of a snare drum with gated reverb, as you can hear on the album's opening track. But the tribal rhythms and the gated reverb wasn't all. Peter had gotten a new interest for world music and invited several session musicians from all around the world to collaborate on the record. Because of this, there were a lot of exotic instrumentation involved as well. Peter mixed the sound of these instruments with synths and other typical electronic instruments in the studio to give the album a very experimental and alternative sound.
Gotta get some food. I'm so hungry all the time. I don't know how to stop.
Now, Peter has been described by co-producers as a very slow and meticulous musician. He would spend hours tweaking his songs and often ending up with several versions and hours upon hours of material for one specific song. And then he would of course cut it down to fit the record afterwards.
He's a slow worker, and I think the main problem is he likes to keep every possible option open as long as he can.
The work with the musicians on their drum, bass and guitar parts went on for several weeks. When this part of the process was over, Gabriel had amassed 27 16-minute tapes, over 7 hours of material. There were now different versions of 18 possible songs, several of which were running at over 10 minutes.
But Gabriel didn't just have a passion for creating and recording music. He's also expressed interest for politics and human rights. A song that perfectly illustrates this is Biko, a song that honors the work of the black anti-apartheid leader who died in South African prison in 1977. From there, Peter's career took on a new direction. He started a long-standing association with Amnesty International. Over the years, he became an avid participant in their human rights concerts, and after being inspired by the social activism he encountered in his work with Amnesty, he co-founded Witness, a non-profit organization that equips, trains, and supports locally based organizations worldwide to use video and the internet for human rights documentation and advocacy.
And they told me that they'd been tortured, they'd seen family members murdered in front of them. They couldn't get justice. Those in power were able to get away with murder, torture, because there wasn't the technology there that allowed witnesses to be seen and heard. Video evidence could transform what happened around a case.
Just last year, the organization celebrated 25 years of activity, and Gabriel made sure to thank his supporters on the Witness YouTube channel and reminded everyone why the organization was started to begin with. Now, going back to his music, Gabriel's interest for world music was most evident on his third album, but this influence has increased over the years, which made him start the World of Music, Arts and Dance Festival. The first WOMAD festival was organized in Shepton Mallet in the UK in 1982, but Gabriel and his company at this point was at the verge of financial ruin because of the high costs of the festival. Not enough people showed up because of little publicity, which worsened when there was a lack of suitable transport to the venue as well. Because of the financial difficulties, Gabriel's manager suggested that he and the remaining members of Genesis would put up a single show under the name Six of the Best. And luckily enough, the money from this concert made it possible for Gabriel to continue the WOMAD festival in the future. The festival has been arranged all across the world throughout the years, something I think resonates with its ethos, which is to be embracing but non-definitive, inspiring and outward-looking, and more than anything, enthusiastic about a world that has no boundaries in its ability to communicate through music and movement.
Around 1980, I started listening to some of the music coming from other cultures. And as an old drummer, I fell in love with some of the grooves that I was hearing and a wonderful sort of mix of melodies and arrangements. I phoned up a group of fellow enthusiasts and started trying to create an event, which 2 years later became the first WOMAD festival in Shepton Mallet.
Peter Gabriel has mentioned that their nomadic approach to festival arrangements is one of the things that he's the most proud of. But the WOMAD festival isn't everything. As an extension to the festival, he also created Real World Studios and the record label by the same name. Through this studio and his record label, he's been giving musicians he collaborated with on his solo records through WOMAD and other places the ability to share music from all around the world, capturing loads of different pieces of culture around the world and then preserving it in a way. I really think it's fascinating to see what Peter Gabriel has done over the years. Witness, WOMAD, his passion for world music, and his studio are all things that indicate that Peter Gabriel is curious, tolerant, and willing to share music to better communication and peace between people. Because of this, I really hope more people explore the world of Peter Gabriel and perpetuate those values that he had as a fellow lover of music and people. I want to thank you for watching this video, and I also want to give a huge shout out to David, James, Nick, Mike, Middle8, Marshall, Marlene, Marek, Lyndon, Kyle, Jacqueline, F-Fun, Florence, Bishwa, and Amadio over at Patreon for supporting me there. And if you want to support me as well, make sure you click the first link in the description below, and I'll see you over there. Thank you so much. Goodbye.